All right, thank you very much for keeping it Good Morning Kenya. Now, the fiscal budget for the year 2020-2021 will be pronounced under a harsh economic state and condition, both nationally and globally. Now, this is due to the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has affected different economies around the world. This morning, we shall be putting into focus the expectations that are there in regards to the budget 2020-2021 that shall be read today in the afternoon in Parliament. Joining me this morning, I'm joined by Honorable David Sankok, who is a Member of Parliament. Karibu sana, Mheshimiwa.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your presence. I hope you're well.
I'm always fine.
Coronavirus has affected the whole nation.
The whole nation, not even only Kenya, it is the whole world.
Yeah. Remember, you can be part of this conversation as we talk about the budget 2020-2021 expectation. The hashtag, as always, is Good Morning Kenya at Ramaguko. At KBC Channel 1 is the official station handle. At Ray Manyara, at Jane Wamboi, and at Doreen Arage. But speaking of Doreen, we shall be linking up with her even as we continue with this conversation. She is on the ground as we look at what people are saying in regards to the expectations of the budget. But now, speaking of this budget, Mheshimiwa, from where you sit, what is your expectation of the budget as a Member of Parliament?
First of all, you know, this is a very unique budget. For the first time in the history of our country, we are reading a budget in the background of so many factors that have affected our nation. You know, we have just emerged from the attack of Al-Shabaab.
Yeah.
After finishing with the Al-Shabaab, we got the locust invasion, which also destroyed our economy to some extent.
Floods.
Especially the backbone of the economy of this country, that is agriculture. We came to floods now. Floods also destroyed life and destroyed crops, which is also another backbone of our economy. Now again, even before we finished, we are now in COVID-19, which have also brought down not only the economy of Kenya, but the economy of the whole world. We have closed our borders. So whatever importation that we used to have in terms of agricultural imports from Tanzania, from Uganda, and even from Brazil, the cereals are no longer probably coming in the numbers that they used to come. We know also we have closed our borders in terms of tourism, which is also another foreign exchange and foreign earner in our country. We know the whole world is affected, even the Kenyans that are in diaspora, which is also another foreign earner in our country. So literally our economy is at its knees. Never in the history of pre and post-independent era are we reading a budget in a situation like we are now today.
Pandemic. The first
yes,
time as a country,
the first time as a country that we are facing not only the pandemic of coronavirus, but locust invasion, Al-Shabaab attack, and also the floods.
Everything on all
everything
sides.
At once.
Do you see us, recovering from this?
So as we were preparing the budget, because there is only one arm of government with the sole mandate of preparing the budget. Allocation of funds is only done in Parliament. So for us, we have been in a budget-making process for the past 2 or so weeks. And it have been balancing from here and there and making sure that we cushion Kenyans against this particular pandemic. And I'm sure the budget that will be read today, Kenyans will be happy, because what we have done is to try and much as possible. We have been having 2 and 4th responses from the national government, together with the Budget and Appropriation Committee chaired by the able chairman, Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, who is one of the best chairmen ever to sit in the gas house. And we have been having a cordial relationship with the national government, to the executive arm of government, to try and as much as possible to cushion Kenyans. Now,
so you can assure Kenyans that they will smile after the budget being read today.
Exactly, because what we have tried to do is to customize this particular budget. It is not business as usual. We have tried to cushion a majority of Kenyans, because we have the very vulnerable Kenyans. We have 200 million for cash transfer for persons with disability, because we know they are more vulnerable than any other person. Because first of all, person with disability, the government have tried to assist them to some extent in terms of access to government procurement opportunity, tax exemption, and duty-free vehicles, and even the cash transfer to severely disabled persons, which was there. But remember again, almost 50% of our persons with disability who depend on donors. The borders have been closed, so donors are no longer coming in to assist. We also, persons with disability being assisted by churches and religious organizations, which are also closed their doors. So you find that persons with disability have become more vulnerable. And that is why we have a cash transfer scheme that persons with disability have been identified, some have been targeted, because not all of them are poor.
So in the budget, there is an allocation.
There is an allocation.
For persons with disabilities.
Yes, severe disability. There's also an allocation. For instance, there was a proposal that I had brought to Parliament, which I don't know if it will be reflected, but if it will not be reflected in today's budget, we'll still further renegotiate. Because there is normally the capitation money that is sent for every student in our institution of learning. Capitation money. You know, primary school is supposed to be free, secondary school is supposed to be free, so there is an allocation for every student. Now, all students are at home. So we are saying, why don't we use this capitation fee, capitation money, and redirect it to the Ministry of Agriculture? Because majority of Kenyans have now migrated from urban centers to rural areas because of the bills that are come with the urban centers, the rent, the electricity bill, the water bills. So when they go to rural areas, why don't we tap their energy there in the rural areas and invest in agriculture more than, because education is now closed.
Now, Mheshimiwa, when it comes to Parliament,
yes,
I'm aware that members of Parliament at some point were giving their comments in regards to how the Treasury Cabinet Secretary was preparing the budget. And they say that he prepared the budget without taking into account the economic realities of the day.
That's what I have told you, my friend, that we had a back and forth. Because, of course, the executive come up with the budget estimate. But it is the Parliament that will eventually have the final say.
Now, what is your take in regards to how the CS has delivered so far to this point in time?
Excellent. Because he came up with the budget estimates. We put our input. We sent it back to him. He reflected whatever we have told him, and now he discussed the budget like I think the day before yesterday. We are still discussing about that budget. Yeah. So we have had a cordial relationship between National Assembly and the executive, because the executive give us the budget estimate. Ours is to make sure that this is what we reflect, because it is the National Assembly which is the representative of the people. So it is us who actually make sure that this is what Kenyans want. So
let's look at the different aspects of these conversations that have been there, because also we've had proceedings in Parliament in addressing these issues. According to the Parliament Budget Appropriations Committee, Treasury was supposed to look into the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic while allocating financial resources according to the across the public sector. Now, how was this concluded during all these conversations?
The conclusion is what we can, a mutual understanding, because whatever Parliament had, because remember, this is a conversation between two arms of government.
Yes.
Just like the conversation that we have now. The conversation that we have now, you ask me a question, I also respond the question,
yes.
You also put your input, I also put my input, and then we come up with a conclusion.
It is a two-way.
It is a two-way. So it is bound that you'll have such responses that Parliament, like now, if I stand as a representative of person with disability, I'll say, what is for person with disability? I will be told 200 million. I will say it is not enough. Of course, I will be convinced that even if it is not enough, we also have other sectors that need. We also have the orphans and vulnerable children, which need this money. We also have the elderly persons who also need this money, and we have Kenyans who are manual workers who also need to be cushioned. We have a lot of Kenyans who have lost their job, especially in the hospitality industry, who also need to be cushioned. So we had a 2 and 4, but does not mean that we had any bad blood, and does not mean that there was something that executive did that we did not like as Parliament. It was only that everybody, as a representative of the people, you also have to fight for your people. to some extent, and you will be convinced. And I am sure we have been convinced this is how it was supposed to be. And then again, the first budget estimate that was brought to Parliament was as if it is business as usual, that the allocation was done the way it used to be done to maybe big mega projects, and we said we don't have...
And that was the area of concern for
we don't now
members of
have
Parliament.
to invest on mega projects because Kenyans are going on hungry. Kenyans are not able to pay rent. Kenyans are actually starving. So what we will need to invest on is the priorities. So we as Parliament, as the representative of the people, you know, executive, it is the Kenyans that voted for this constitution, which made sure that the CSS are not representative of the people. They are technocrats. And when it comes to technocrats, they will think of roads, they will think of airports, they will think of other mega projects. But as a representative of the people, who are always interacting with the people on the ground, we know the needs of the people. So we brought in the need of the Kenyan people, and the national government, the executive, accepted our input. And we came up with a mutual, a really mutually understood budget between the two arms of government.
So far, between the two arms of government, you're okay with how the CS for Treasury has performed so far, expecting positive response?
100%.
100%. Now, what is your take in regards to the investments towards the Big Four agenda? Are they substantive so far?
You know, of course, we are on the line to achieving the Big Four agenda of our president. And of course, the Jubilee Manifesto, which had a lot of promises to Kenyans. Electricity, connectivity, free education. Of course, education institutions have been closed. We wanted to make sure that there is free maternity. We wanted to increase our road network by another maybe 3,000 kilometers of new tarmac. We wanted the standard gauge railway to reach to Kisumu and so on. But you know, this pandemic, nobody expected this pandemic. Nobody expected the locust invasion. Nobody expected the magnitude that we had in terms of floods. So now the priorities have been changed. So the Big Four agenda may at least delay for some time because of the investment that we will now do in terms of cushioning Kenyans. You know, the president recently released 10 billion of cash to the cash transfer to elderly, orphans and vulnerable children together with severely disabled. That is a total of 10 billion Kenya shilling. 10 billion Kenya shilling, if you divide with the 50 million per a kilometer of tarmac road, you know how many kilometers of tarmac road it could have done. So that tarmacking of that road probably may delay for some time, but the issue is that we are still on course in achieving the Big Four agenda of our president and the Jubilee Manifesto, but we have to deal with what is happening now.
How are we going to look into the budget? Because the Big Four agenda also has to be budgeted for.
Yes, and that is why we are saying you have had institution complaining. You have had judiciary complaining because of probably because of reduce in terms of funding. You have had also Parliament. Our per diems, our travel cost money have been reduced. But it is because we have reduced money across board. Even county government, I know they will be complaining because we have reduced allocation of every sector so that we can also put money into the COVID-19 in cushioning Kenyans. And as you are aware, is that when we reduce probably money meant for judiciary, of course there is some infrastructure that will reduce in terms of funding. The same with the infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of the Big Four agenda, the housing, and so on. But we are investing so much on food security. Because when it comes to a pandemic like this one, of international magnitude, then we start with what we call priorities. And our priority now as Kenyans is basic needs. Basic needs start with food, first of all. You can walk naked, but you cannot walk on an empty stomach. You can decide to postpone buying of clothes. You can use this one for another 2 years or 3 years. I can use this one for, I've been having one suit for throughout, wash and wear. Now somebody can do that, but you cannot do that on an empty stomach. So we'll start with the stomach, then we go to clothing, and then we go to housing. So because you can sleep on a mabati house for some time, but you cannot stay for 1 month
As long as
without food.
As long as you have something in your stomach,
In your
you're
stomach.
okay.
So what we are doing as an arm of government
Yes, yes.
is prioritize. Which are the priorities now? Of course, the priority now is not the stadium. The priority now is not standard gauge railway. The priority now is not the roads. The priority now, first of all, begins with feeding Kenyans and cushioning them.
But now we have people, so many people who are food insecure. We have the need for emergency food assistance. It increased to 2.6 million in 2019 from 1.1 million in 2015. And it is still expected to increase this aspect of people requiring food. What is your outlook from where you sit on how food security is going to be ensured, specifically on what you've mentioned?
You know, my friend, I love you people of the media because you like magnifying issues. Even the small issues, you make it very big. You know, if you have given me the percentage of Kenyans that required food in 1963 and the percentage of Kenyans that require food now, but not the numbers, because the numbers of 1963 are not the numbers of 2020.
Are you saying these numbers are false?
No, I'm not saying these numbers are false, but it is a total reflection of our increase in population. Because probably our population in 1963 was 7 million. So people who are requiring food, maybe 100,000 of them. And 100,000 of them, it probably is 10% of the total population.
But still, there are people who require food and it needs to be addressed.
Yes, and that is what we are trying to address.
How?
And that is why I've told you in the budget of 2020 is that we have so much prioritized the issue of food security. We have prioritized the issue of agriculture. You have heard my proposal that now that we don't have capitation fee going to every student, why don't we use that money? If it was 50,000 per every student, and we have a total of 1 million students, why don't you take 1 million youth, give them 50,000 as the capitation money that was supposed to go to education, so that this youth can invest in agriculture, can invest in farming. Yes, if you are in a pastoralist region, you can invest in rearing of livestock. If you are in an agricultural region, you can invest in crops. So we are saying, why don't you put more money on agriculture now that the education sector, we redirect the money that was meant for education sector, because what are they doing now? Our institutions are closed. We may be opening on September, and it is not even in guarantee. And we may be opening only candidates, that's class 8 and class Form 4s. So what about the capitation fee that was meant for other students who are supposed to be in school and now they are at home? Why don't you use that money in increasing our crops cover in our country?
So you're saying even within the education sector, investments should not be that much there. We should, bring a balance and take some money from one sector.
The institutions are closed, my friend. So every student was eating food while they were in school. They are now eating food at home. We had money for every student. The capitation fee, that is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about salary of teachers, because they need to receive their salary. I'm not talking about salary of non-teaching staff. I'm talking of that capitation fee that was meant for every student. Why don't we invest that money into agriculture now that students are at home? So that's what we are saying. We are balancing. We are directing some money from this institution to another one. So if the Ministry of Education today come and complain of the reduce in their budget, it is not a normal complaint. And then even judiciary will complain. Even county government will complain. But we will redirect more money in cushioning Kenyans.
So you're saying there are sectors that need to be amplified during this time. So you've mentioned food.
I've mentioned food, and food is agriculture.
What else? What other sectors?
I've mentioned about maybe housing, because Kenya need shelter. And for that purpose, they need cheaper housing. So we can continue with the Big Four agenda, the part of housing, simply because Kenyans need housing. You know, now paying even rent for Kenyans is difficult. And balancing between telling landlords not to charge rent. How do you tell somebody not to charge rent who have invested and who have bank loans?
You're asking them to waive the rent.
If possible. Because we cannot have a legislative framework. We cannot have a law to force your private investment to be for free, for public. It is not possible.
Not possible.
We cannot make that law. It is nowhere in the world.
It will affect someone on the ground.
Yes, because now we have the transport sector. People have taken loan to buy matatus. And then I tell them, okay, don't charge transportation fee. They are buying fuel. What will they use to buy fuel? They are servicing their car loan. What will they use to service that loan? If you are telling a landlord, don't charge rent. Now, how will they be paying their bills? How will they be paying their loans? So we are telling landlords, out of humanity. This is a pandemic that have affected all of us. There are philanthropic people who are even donating their own money. Out of that philanthropy and out of humanity, if you can waive a certain percentage of rent for Kenyan citizens, but it is the ultimate responsibility of the government to give its citizen shelter. And that's why we are saying the housing, the Big Four agenda in terms of housing will go on.
So that discussion needs to be there between landlords and tenants, so that we can know different landlords in different parts of the country.
But there will be no law to tell landlord don't charge rent. There will be no law.
There will be no law.
Yes.
Now, what is your take in regards to how we can use the Big Four agenda to be a driver of the towards economic recovery in the next financial year?
Now we have the four.
Yes.
That's why we call it the Big Four agenda. Two of them are priorities. I've just talked of housing. I've also talked of food security.
Manufacturing.
So that's why we are saying we'll invest so much on food security. Manufacturing, yes, but it's not as a priority as compared to food security. I've just elaborated to you how you can go on an empty stomach with tattered cloth.
Let's talk about the other agenda, health.
Of course, that is another priority, and that's why we invest. We are saying the Big Four agenda. 3 out of the 4 are actually priorities to us, and that's why we are investing so much on the health sector. If you see now the budget today, you will find that a lot of money will go to the health sector. Will go to insurance, health insurance firm like NHIF, so that we will make sure that we have cushioned Kenyans, because we are now anticipating Kenyans getting sick. And
no, but Mheshimiwa, isn't manufacturing a key sector in the economic recovery plan?
We are saying all of them are key and they are priorities. But if you prioritize, you will see that it is not as urgent as the others, because manufacturing will come in recovery of our economy. Yes, after it the pandemic probably have subsided, or we have been able to control the pandemic. So it will come a bit later. It will not be like food. You can wait to buy other clothes, but you cannot wait for food. Yeah, you can wait to build a better house, but does not mean that we will wait for food. So
now the CS, Kuriatani, intends to borrow 473.6 billion Kenyan shillings from the local market and 349.7 billion Kenyan shillings from the foreign market for development projects. Now this means that domestic borrowing here will rise to 20.98% from the 391.45 billion shilling targeted by Treasury for the current year. Now, what is your take in regards to addressing the need to borrow, the state of borrowing in the country? How can you address that?
My friend, let us even take a typical example of a common Kenyan citizen.
Yeah.
If you go and take a loan, you may take 100 million, I take 1 million. The pertinent question is that, how have you invested your 100 million? How have I invested my 1 million? If you invest your 100 million nicely, and I invest my 1 million nicely, then you will not tell me, why did you borrow less, or why did you borrow more? What we will be asking is that, is the borrowed money invested in the targeted projects and in the right way?
Has it brought anything?
If it have been invested in the right way, because I've heard Kenyans saying that the Jubilee administration have borrowed. But surely the infrastructure part of it also reflect on our borrowing, because the standard gauge railway, which was built, the last railway that we had was built in the 1900 by the colonial government. Almost 120 years later, is when we are building another railway. That is a standard gauge railway. We have been able to build 7,000 kilometers of new tarmac. 7,000. And you remember the 78 years of the colonial rule was only able to build, I think, around 100 and something kilometers of tarmac. So what we are saying is that we have been able to invest the borrowed money wisely, and Kenyans can attest to it.
When the Treasury, the committee was looking into this is what the committee said, and I quote, "This trend is contrary to the provisions undertaken by the National Treasury to ensure that there is reduced domestic borrowing, as well as targeting cheaper financing from multilateral and bilateral sources." End of quote. That was what the committee said in the review of the 2020-21 budget. So how do we ensure that there is a reduction?
Now you have seen that we have said that we should reduce domestic borrowing.
How do you ensure
so that we have money circulating within our economy?
Yes.
We have said even if we have to borrow from outside, we should not borrow commercial loans. We should borrow cheaper loans. And there is that whatever. But the cheaper loans have a lot of probably, it comes with, what do you call it? It comes with a lot of stringent measures. And sometimes you find Treasury finding the red tape measures that are in cheaper loans being a bit aggressive.
Interest rates?
Yes, more than the commercial loans. So it is easier to get the commercial loans more than, it's just like when you talk of Fuliza. It is easier to get Fuliza than going to the bank and borrowing loan.
Yeah,
so you'll find more people running towards Fuliza. And that is why we have advised the Treasury that even if it is easier to access commercial loans, it is expensive ultimately to the Kenyan people. So relax and use the red tape measures that are required for you to get cheaper loans, because ultimately we want cheaper loans for Kenyans. Even if it will take some time, let them be a bit patient rather than rushing. You know, Kenyans have rushed to Fuliza because it is easier to get that loan from Fuliza. Mobile banking, it is very easier, but ultimately it is more expensive than the normal commercial loans from commercial banks. So what we have also advised Treasury, and it's advice that we have given them, and I'm sure they have taken the advice, is that go for cheaper loans.
Now, there are so many challenges that we are facing as a nation. You mentioned them earlier on: locusts, floods, you know, Al-Shabaab,
yes.
COVID-19. We can name them all.
Yes.
All of them have to be addressed in this budget.
Yes.
Now, as a member of parliament, from where you sit, what would be your take in regards to the implementation of addressing all of this, considering we are trying to work on the budget that we have and all of the matters need to be addressed? What is the success rate of addressing all of these issues?
As I have told you,
Yes.
that we have put priorities. We have prioritized. Never in the history of Kenya, in the post and pre-independent era, have we been faced by challenges that we have been faced with it now.
Yeah.
And you have enumerated them well.
Yes.
The Al-Shabaab, the locust invasion, the floods, and then again here we have the COVID-19 that have destabilized the whole world economy. Now, other countries in the world are faced with COVID-19 alone. But for us, we have 4 big challenges that we are faced with. But I can assure Kenyans that our success rate will be 100%. Only that some of non-priority areas, like the infrastructure, may be delayed. The finishing time may be postponed for some time. But what we are 100% sure as Parliament is that we have addressed the challenges that we have in the budget, and we are sure that we will emerge victorious as a country. That is what an assurance I can give Kenyans. Because what we have just tried to do is to delay the achievement of other non-essential services. Yes.
Now, in the 2019-2020 financial year, you know, the Kenyan taxpayer footed 301 billion Kenyan shillings and 131 billion shillings in interest bills on external and domestic debt respectively. So we are talking about 301 billion on interest bills and on external, and we are talking about 131 billion shillings on domestic debt. When the report was given, this is what the report says. Amid the ongoing pandemic, the committee urges Treasury to start the process of renegotiating the terms and conditions of existing loans with a view of striking a deal for a moratorium, including having a grace period of interest and principal payments, end of quote. So let's look at this, the grace period that was proposed by the committee. Do you think that one is effective, and how do you see it being implemented in the future?
You know the issue of the lender and the borrower.
Yes.
We are just as a country trying to table our challenges, which of course are understood all over the world. Everybody knows the challenge of COVID-19 have brought economies to a standstill. So it is for us to advise Treasury to renegotiate the grace period and even the repayment of the interest. We may even end up having some loans being waived. And it is only that we actually borrowed so much on commercial loans rather than the cheaper loans, which will have even led to waiving of some of these loans.
That was the mistake there?
That was a mistake there. Because commercial loans, it is very difficult for commercial loans to be waived. It would be very difficult. But if it was other loans, it will have been concessions loans. That was the word I was looking for. If it was concession loans, it was been easier for it to be waived. But as we understand, and I want Kenyans to understand, that let us not so much dwell on the debt part of it. Let us also talk of the benefit of whatever loans that the government have taken. You know, free maternity, free education in secondary and primary school, electricity connectivity, which is almost at 99%. All schools, most of the schools now are connected to electricity. Let us also talk of the infrastructure. Let us talk of the 30 billion cash transfer to the vulnerable members of society, that is the older persons above the age of 70 years. Let's talk of orphans and vulnerable children, severely disabled persons. You know, all these funds are sometimes taken out of our budget. Now, the infrastructure part of it now and development part of it will now lack funding. And that is why we went for borrowing, so that we can still finance our budget in terms of infrastructure and other development projects. Because a lot of our money have gone to cushion the vulnerable members of society. You know, in Kenya, never again in the Jubilee administration is giving birth a death sentence to our women, because there is free maternity. So we have really to see what we have borrowed and vis-a-vis the benefit that we have gotten from that borrowing.
Because currently even the common mwananchi, the Wanjiko on the ground, some are still paying their loans as we speak, because regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic, loans still are being
must be paid.
Yes.
Because, you know, like now, I've told you, I've given you an example. If you borrow 100 million, and I've borrowed 1 million, and we all bought matatu of the same amount, then you will have borrowed, you will have not invested, you are borrowing nicely. But if you bought maybe or invested in a business worth 100 million and I invested in a business worth 10 million, your payment of loan will be different from my repayment, but we have all invested wisely. So we cannot compare ourselves and say, Uganda, for instance, have not borrowed a lot of money. How much have they invested in terms of infrastructure? How much have they invested in terms of free maternity and free secondary and primary school education, vis-a-vis how much we have invested as a country? How much have they invested to their senior citizens as we have invested as a country? So we have really to see the benefit that it comes with investment. I know all Kenyans have loans, and all loans are not equal. Somebody have more loan, another one have less loan, but how much have they invested? You know, if you borrow loan and you go and drink with it alcohol, then that is when we say you have borrowed unwisely. But if you borrowed loan and invested it in a business that will eventually repay that loan, invested in real estate, then we'll say that you have invested wisely. So borrowing of Kenyan's government have been invested wisely.
Apart
from the little part of corruption, which I am sure is what is affecting our country.
But now let me also concentrate on that a bit, because based on the committee, the report said this, and I quote, the committee has established that the cost of, now get this, the cost of debt financing actually consumes more financial resources from than development expenditure for which the debt is obtained. How, can we look into that?
I've given you an example. If you have borrowed 100 million and invested in real estate, you have an apartment.
Yes.
Of course, your debt repayment will be more than any other development project that we'll be doing.
But eventually, thereby affecting everything.
Yes, but eventually, when you complete the loan, the apartment that you had built will remain to be yours and your family. And now you will reap the benefit from it and the profit from it. We have just completed the 7,000 tarmac road. We have just completed the standard gauge railway to all the way to Naivasha and to Suswa. And we have just completed those phases, the two phases. The benefit of that will be seen eventually when we finish repayment of loans.
Now,
because if you buy a matatu using loan, your repayment of the loan will be more than the amount of money you'll be using for your social upkeep. But eventually when you complete the repayment of the matatu loan, then you will find that all the profit will be coming to you, and you can use the profit to buy even matatu and other development projects. That's what we are saying in Kenya. At the moment, we may not see the benefit of the borrowing because we are still repaying the loans. But the moment we complete repaying the loan, we'll now see the benefit of standard gauge railway. You will see the benefit of the 7,000 tarmac roads. You will see the benefit because you'll be reaping from them, and you will all be putting your profit together for development.
Now, before the COVID-19 pandemic struck, the CS for Treasury was calling for austerity measures across government spending that came across different sectors. With regards to the call for austerity measures on government spending by the CS, do you feel as though this one should also be part of what needs to be addressed right now?
Yeah, exactly. In the budget process, we have really addressed those issues, and we have said they're non-essential services. Yes, why don't we just put them pending? The foreign travels have been closed because of the closing of borders and closing of the whole world. The whole world is at lockdown. Now, why don't you redirect the foreign travel money from parliament and from judiciary and from any other arm of government towards what is more urgent at the moment? And austerity measures are always there, even in your own families. In the strike of COVID-19, everybody put on austerity measures at the home. Some actually had to go for cheaper houses. Some had to make sure that they have reduced their food budget. If you normally eat maybe chicken every day, you have now said it is twice a week or so. So the measures are always there. And we have put those measures to make sure that we have cushioned Kenyans. So it is normal. And we had advised even before. Because let me tell you, and this is what I proposed. Why do we buy newspapers to government officials? That one they can buy for themselves. At the moment, we can be using 1 million toilet papers in all government washrooms. Why don't everybody buy their own toilet paper, which is 10 shillings each? We will be saving a lot as a government. Why don't everybody buy for themselves tea in their respective? You have seen what the Ministry of Health was using in terms of tea. Why don't you reverse that money in terms of millions into cushioning Kenyans?
2.7 trillion shilling budget.
Yes.
At a pandemic like this, it's too high. Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the tweets.
How high is it? How high? You have said it is too high. How high is it?
Let's take a look at the tweets there that are coming through. Remember, the hashtag is Good Morning Kenya. At KBC Channel 1, at Ramagugo, at Nicholas Oseko is saying the budget process in Kenya is an important part of government planning and decision making.
I agree.
You agree with that?
100%. Oseka Hongara.
Next tweet. Do you have the next tweet? All right. At Moses, cannot read the second name, but Moses is saying Kenya's 2021 is estimated at 2.7
3 trillion.
That's what I had mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, and you know, you guys of the media, you are nowadays foreseers and prophets. You can foresee that this one is too high. You can even prophesize. You can even read body language, you know, so and so body language shows that they are no longer in bromance and so on. So, but it is your work. So go on.
As a watchdog.
But for us,
But
we deal with
that.
the reality. Yeah, for us, we deal with the reality.
Based on
and make sure that we cushion Kenyans.
Based on reality, is 2.7 trillion shilling budget something that Kenyans, as a country, you can work with?
Exactly, absolutely. We had sat in parliament. We had made sure that this is what is attainable and this is what will make Kenyans comfortable.
Let's look at the next tweet that was coming up. Corey Lenny is saying, I would love to hear CS Yatani to advertise for youth employment on permanent basis. Important point there. Youth
Very
employment.
Important. And that is why I said that there is money that is meant for capitation of students in our institution. Now that they are not in our institution, why do we redirect that money to the youth to invest in agriculture? Because most of them are now in rural areas, so that we can tap in their energy. You know, youth have extra energy. If we don't tap in their extra energy, somebody else will do that. And somebody else may mean Al-Shabaab. Somebody else may mean another terrorist gang, so or drug dealers. So why don't we just tap from the extra energy of the youth and invest in food security in terms of agriculture? Because most of them have now gone to the rural areas. By the way, this pandemic can be a blessing in disguise, because most of us have migrated from rural from urban centers to rural areas.
Let's take a look at this tweet, Mheshimiwa. Jeremiah Kairuki is saying the budget is already drawn. My hope is that it heads to counties and national levels for the purpose of helping the public and not to give in private pockets. Corruption there.
Corruption. It is the cancer that is within us. And you know, I also advise the judiciary for them to assist us in fighting this corruption. You know, as parliament, we make the laws, which will be used by judiciary. As the executive, theirs is to implement the projects. It is the judiciary and the sole mandate of the judiciary to make sure that it have fight corruption. You know, you find there was another day, I don't know if you remember, there was a boy who slaughtered a cat in Nakuru. And his case was determined within 1 week. And he was sentenced within 1 week.
I remember that story.
You remember that story?
Yeah.
And there was no complainant. Nobody had complained that they had stomachache after eating the cat, the slaughtered cat and the sambusas.
But within a week,
but within a week, they were already sentenced. But corrupt people who siphon government money during daytime, you know, there is no bank that is open during night. So they siphon the money during daytime. There is transfer of money from central bank, from exchequer to the ministries, and then eventually transfer that money to private pockets. How is it that it is difficult to get that evidence by the judiciary? So I call upon Maraga, instead of so much complaint and hulabaloo of the media, why don't you convict one corrupt official, top government corrupt official? Why don't you convict one cabinet secretary? Why don't you convict one permanent secretary, so that we know that we are fighting corruption?
Mheshimiwa, thank you very much for your time.
Yes.
That is Hon David Sankok, nominated Member of Parliament, discussing the 2020-2021 budget expectation. Now, my colleague Doreen Arange is also on standby on location to give us more what she has on her side.